I have great pleasure at this time to introduce to you or present to you our dearly beloved friend, Glenn Mitchell.
Hello, our friends. I hope you will pardon my opening my talk with a personal reference. This is a deeply moving experience for me because, as most of you know, I was born in this country and I was educated in the cause of God here. I learned about the new covenant from my uncle, who initiated the first Rose Garden. That is the name that was used for Sunday schools. We refuse to use the word Sunday school. As you know, the Baha'i faith was established in Jamaica during the first 7-year plan. And since that time, I have known about it. Although I am in the depths of this experience, I still find it incredible that I should be representing the chief executors of the tablets of the divine plan addressed to America by the beloved Master. I don't know what I have done in this life to deserve such a privilege. I am humbled by it, and I am somewhat speechless by the experience. There are 4 members of the National Spiritual Assembly of the United States with us today, including myself, and I think it's only proper that I should introduce them at least by name. If they're in the hall, they can stand up. The Vice Chairman of the National Spiritual Assembly of the United States, Dr. Daniel C. Jordan. The Assistant Secretary of that Assembly, Ms. Charlotte M. Linford. And one who is perhaps not known to every Jamaican believer, but to a very large number, over 1,000, who came in during the month of March when a teaching team was sent from the United States to this island to teach on the western half of the island. Miss Magdalene Carney led that team. Beloved friends, the Universal House of Justice has called upon this conference for a discussion of the subject, teaching people of African descent. In a letter addressed to National Spiritual Assemblies as far back as July 1970, that is, those assemblies represented here, the House of Justice wrote, "We have just written to the National Spiritual Assembly of Jamaica requesting that they include on the program of the conference to be held in Jamaica the subject of teaching people of African descent, and that discussion be held on the subject of pioneering in Africa." The Universal House of Justice goes on to say in a letter addressed to the Assembly of Jamaica, "Since this item is being added to the program, we are requesting the National Spiritual Assemblies of Colombia, Brazil, Guyana, Suriname, and French Guiana, and the Teaching Committee in Trinidad and Tobago to consider sending representatives to the conference in Kingston." You see how important this subject is to this conference. It is my hope, and I'm sure the hope of my brother from Haiti, who will be discussing this subject with us too, that all of the friends gathered here will take every opportunity to discuss this subject after the presentations and to think of the ways and means of reaching these peoples of African descent and of encouraging those who become Baha'is to pioneer to Africa. Because as the House of Justice says, it has recommends in its letter, people of African descent would be more acceptable as pioneers than people of other racial backgrounds. In that wonderful message read by the Hand of the Cause of God, Mr. Kadem, yesterday, we find these words: "The Americas have been a melting pot and a meeting place for the races of men, and the need is acute for the fulfillment of God's promises of the realization of the oneness of mankind." Beloved friends, the colored peoples of the world form the majority of mankind. Our objective in teaching at this dark period in world history is to attract the hearts of the masses of the people, most of whom are deprived of the benefits of true civilization. The House of Justice affirms, in a letter that was written on the subject of mass teaching, when the masses of mankind are awakened and enter the faith of God, a new process is set into motion and the growth of a new civilization begins. The huge majority of peoples in the Caribbean area are descendants of African slaves, are an admixture of descendants of East Indian and Chinese laborers who were brought to these lands to satisfy the greed of colonial powers. The consequence of the horrible experiences they had under slavery and under near slave labor express themselves in the current state of uncertainty about their self-worth, identity, and purpose. We find in the books and in the studies being conducted on the subject of identity in these islands, we find in the stirrings of the masses in these islands, whether they have achieved independence or not, this frantic activity, a search for something to settle their concerns and to once and for all give them a sense of the real purpose of their existence. I have been reading in the last several weeks a book published in Jamaica entitled Mirror, Mirror, Identity, Race, and Protest in Jamaica. You would not suspect from the speech made by the distinguished governor of Jamaica yesterday that there was any problems of identity and race in Jamaica, but there are problems, and here are some statements that we should appreciate in order to carry on our purpose as Baha'is. This is about Jamaica. Attitudes among the black-skinned masses still exist which betray a self-contempt and a lack of self-confidence. Herein lies the greatest danger to attempts at finding an identity in terms of race. For a people who do not believe in themselves cannot hope to have others believing in them. The insecurities of this important racial grouping persist with a vengeance. In another revealing passage from the book, we find this. A well-known Jamaican journalist and political commentator once said that the most obvious bar to integration of our society is the white bias that assaults and degrades the sense of self-respect of the vast majority of the Jamaican people. If everything worthwhile is to be associated with white, goodness, beauty, even God, and if the society as a whole accepts these standards without question, then you are condemning the non-white groups in our society to a permanent and perpetual inferiority, since they are inexorably outside the pale of whiteness. We find again this statement in spite of the motto of the country. There must be the liberation of the Jamaican black, whether he be peasant, proletarian, or struggling middle class, from the chains of self-contempt. self-doubt, and cynicism. Correspondingly, there will have to be the liberation of Jamaican whites, real and functional, from the bondage of a lopsided Creole culture which tends to maintain for themselves an untenable position of privilege. Is it any wonder, friends, in contemplating these passages, is it any wonder that the House of Justice has asked us to discuss this important subject of teaching people of African descent? You think that institution does not know that these conditions exist in this land despite the motto, out of many, one people? And this same statement can be made for most of the Caribbean islands. Most of them have this problem. Friends, let me make a parenthetical statement before going on. This is the kind of subject that makes people uncomfortable. So let us enter into a state of discomfort, because we must handle it. It is our responsibility to change this condition. If this is the leaven that must leaven the lump, if we are the bringers, the conveyors of a civilization, then we must deal with the essentials and not play games. We must not whitewash what we are doing. We must get to the very bottom of the problem, root it out. Our beloved friends, the Indians from these various lands in the Caribbean, you know, the Indians who were found here by the Spanish were all eliminated in 50 years, if I remember my elementary school history. In 50 years, they were eliminated by exploitation. There are none here now. But the Indians who have survived in other areas also experience the same problems. And so addressing ourselves to the problems of the descendants of African slaves is also addressing ourselves to the problems of the American Indians who live in these areas. You know, friends, when Baha'u'llah made his proclamation in Adrianople to the kings and leaders of mankind over 100 years ago, this island was part of the British Empire. That empire was the most extensive political combination at that time that the world had yet seen. It embraced the landmass of Canada, land masses in the Caribbean Sea, vast land masses in Africa, the continent of Australia. There was practically no place on earth that that empire, springing from that island in the Atlantic, didn't touch. All of a sudden, with the coming of the King of Kings, this empire has crumbled. This island in which we stand is a segment, a break-off from that empire. And so are such countries as Ghana, Nigeria, Kenya, Tanzania, and others. This action in recent years, since 1957, toward independence by African nations, the turmoil in Africa, in lands that were once regarded as colonies, all of what we have seen in these few years that have brought these countries to independence and that now embroil them in the perplexities of that attainment. All of these problems are part and parcel of the transition which Baha'u'llah called into being. The transition from what was, that intolerable situation that existed, to that situation that must come to be, the time of peace, the golden age of the dispensation of Baha'u'llah. Although independence for these countries was certainly a reasonable objective, independence has left them, like this land, on their own to search for an identity even more frantically. We Baha'is have a duty to perform. What must we do now? These people surround us in these parts of the world, in the Caribbean, in South America, in Central America, in the United States. I think that rather than dwell upon techniques of teaching, we should spend a great deal of our contemplation on the attitudes we should adopt toward these people in teaching the cause. Our attitudes, friends, must be informed by the pure teachings of Baha'u'llah. His teachings on identity sweep away the necessity, though they do not preclude the secondary recognition of strictly racial or national identities. We find in the hidden words his proclamation, his enunciation of true identity for the individual, for the man. This identity is related to the ancient covenant established by God, the covenant that was born out of love for man, love for his creation. It was out of love that we were created, and it is in the spirit of love that we must find our identity and our purpose in carrying forward an ever-advancing civilization. The covenant itself, which gives us our true identity, whatever our background, cannot be categorized in terms of race, nationality, class, or economic status. Listen to what Baha'u'llah has said about man. O Son of Man, veiled in my immemorial being and in the ancient eternity of my essence, I knew my love for thee. Therefore I created thee, have engraved on thee mine image, and revealed to thee my beauty. He states again, O Son of Man, I loved thy creation, hence I created thee. Wherefore, do thou love me, that I may name thy name, and fill thy soul with the spirit of life. If, dear friends, our teaching, the people of African descent, is suffused with this spirit of love, written of by Baha'u'llah, the techniques will become secondary. The spirit will become obvious, and masses of people of whatever color will become Baha'is. For those people whose hearts have been broken by the experience of exploitation, by the experience of racism in its worst forms, discrimination, this is the message that we must take to them in our attitudes, in our acts, in our words. O Son of Being, with the hands of power I made thee, and with the fingers of strength I created thee, and within thee have I placed the essence of my light. If the essence, dear friends, of the light of God is placed in every living being, there is no reason why any man should feel self-contempt and a sense of worthlessness. The revelation of Baha'u'llah also sets the tone for collective identity. This tone is set are implied in the theme, the oneness of mankind. The pivotal theme around which all of our acts as Baha'is revolve. Shoghi Effendi has written to us on several occasions about the effect of this principle, the oneness of mankind, on the world and on those who have caught the true Baha'i spirit. We find this statement from his writings in the World Order of Baha'u'llah, page 197. The faith of Baha'u'llah has assimilated, by virtue of its creative, its regulative, and ennobling energies, the varied races, nations, nationalities, creeds, and classes that have sought its shadow and have pledged unswerving fealty to its cause. It has changed the hearts of its adherents, burned away their prejudices, stilled their passions, exalted their conceptions, ennobled their motives, coordinated their efforts, and transformed their outlook. Friends, as you can see, there are two levels of identity. One is the essential identity that hooks us up with the covenant of God and with the purpose of our existence and makes us one people regardless of race or nationality. Then there is the secondary identity, which can always be changed. The identity of race, nationality, whatever. This is always subject to change, and we cannot be limited by such identities. They're secondary. So you see, what we are striving for is the essential one. Then we can do something about the secondary identities that we have to deal with. What, friends, must the people of African descent do? And what must we all do toward them if they are to inherit the earth with everybody else? First, we must take the message of Baha'u'llah to them in its pristine simplicity and purity, the same purity in which it was delivered by Baha'u'llah himself. And then they, on their part, having received and accepted the message, must rise up off their knees, seize their God-given chance, and raise up a civilization together with the rest of mankind. A calculated effort on the part of these people to establish separate societies exclusively on the basis of race is foredoomed to failure. Correspondingly, if we who are now the bearers of God's message, or conveyors of God's message, do not recognize the real struggles, the real problems which propel these people toward building their castles on secondary identities, we will have failed in carrying out our duty to mankind. For all peoples to transmute their sufferings into creative energy. And I feel very deeply from my contemplations of the text of this revelation that the difficulties suffered by the black peoples in this part of the world were part of a divine plan. You see, the justice of God expresses itself in peculiar ways. We have lived in a state of war for at least the whole duration of the Adamic cycle. We have not yet had peace in this world. We have gone through the successive stages of infancy, childhood, and adolescence, and now we have just approached our maturity. While going through these stages of infancy, the previous stages, we were bound to fight with one another, to bloody each other's noses, because this is what children do. But finally, children grow up, and they have to sit down together and find out how to resolve their problems, how to stop beating up each other. And we have arrived at that stage. But you know, in the process of beating up each other, of the pitfalls of adolescence, in the impetuosities that seem to overcome youth, we learn ultimately how to be mature beings. This is where the point to which we have arrived as men. I sincerely believe that that historic journey or series of journeys from Africa, those journeys that were conceived in deceit, in the crucible of slavery, and the experience in human degradation that came from that, the brutality and all, were a process of purification for the people who came and for their descendants. It was a process preparing them to become a part of the divine program in the age of fulfillment. It is an experience that taught them patience, that taught them to call on the powers of faith, that taught them to maintain a spirit of nobility even at the very bottom, being at the very bottom of the societies in which they were expected to survive. Now, these same people, together with the descendants of their former masters, have been called by Abdu'l-Baha to be participants, to be spiritual descendants of the Dawnbreakers. Isn't it extraordinary, friends, that at this date, this very date, these descendants of African slaves are now being asked to take the light of the King of Kings to the continent from which their ancestors came. This was their destiny from the beginning. We must teach these people now, quickly, so that they can carry out their destiny. And yet the reality of becoming the conveyors of God's message to what is frequently referred to as the Dark Continent is not the sum of their destiny, of their true destiny. They have other things to do, the most important of which is to accomplish with their white counterparts the unity of mankind in America, in the Americas, so that the rest of the world might be illumined by that new reality. There are many things that I should like to say about the implications of this, the past history and the current condition of people of African descent in these climes, but time will not permit. I feel that we should be, all of us, be aware of the possibilities, aware of the powers that have been granted to us by God in this day, to all people, the white people, the black people, the Indian people, the yellow people, whatever people. Each people has a special contribution to make to the cause of Baha'u'llah and to the kingdom that he came to build. In this part of the world, the contribution must be the unifying of these two races, black and white. Because as the Master said in a speech at Howard University in 1912, the unity, the accomplishment of unity between the colored and the white will be an assurance of the world's peace. I'd like to pass on just a few thoughts to the individuals who are involved in this great drama, the white individuals and the black ones. We know full well that we are all tainted by the cancer of prejudice. There is no way that we could have escaped it, having sprung from the very milieu of prejudice in which we were born. The writings of the cause address themselves to this situation. And we find in the advent of divine justice, that letter written to the American believers in 1938 by our beloved guardian, and which has application now to that country and to this part of the world, we find certain statements which we might well take to heart and act upon. Shoghi Effendi states that there are 3 prerequisites for success in teaching the cause. 1 is rectitude of conduct, with its implications of justice, equity, fair-mindedness, and so on. The other is chastity and holiness, with its implications of clean-mindedness, abstention from drugs, alcohol, and so on. And the third is freedom from prejudice. Shoghi Effendi states specifically that a tremendous effort is required by both races if their outlook, their manners, and conduct are to reflect in this darkened age the spirit and teachings of the faith of Baha'u'llah, casting away once and for all the fallacious doctrine of racial superiority with all its attendant evils, confusion, and miseries, and welcoming and encouraging the intermixture of races and tearing down the barriers that now divide them. They should each endeavor day and night to fulfill their particular responsibilities in the common task which so urgently faces them. Let them, he goes on, while each is attempting to contribute its share to the solution of this perplexing problem, call to mind the warnings of Abdul Baha and visualize, while there is yet time, the dire consequences that must follow if this challenging and unhappy situation that faces the entire American nation, and that I'm interpolating, that faces us here today, is not definitely remedied. The guardian goes on to address himself to each race. Let the white make a supreme effort in their resolve to contribute their share to the solution of this problem, to abandon once and for all their usually inherent and at times subconscious sense of superiority, to correct their tendency towards revealing a patronizing attitude towards the members of the other race, to persuade them through their intimate, spontaneous, and informal association with them of the genuineness of their friendship and the sincerity of their intentions, and to master their impatience of any lack of responsiveness on the part of a people who have received for so long a period such grievous and slow healing wounds. Now, friends, this is what the white pioneers who come to these lands must contemplate and must act upon. If they cannot clean out of their hearts, if they cannot respond positively to this instruction, they should not come to these areas. All of us are struggling to overcome our problems, our backgrounds, whatever limitations we have. All of us must be used to the good of the faith and the exaltation of the spirit of Baha'u'llah. But if we cannot overcome this thing readily, admitting that we are struggling with it, let us then pioneer to Europe. Here. Shoghi Effendi didn't do things in half measures. He also addressed himself to the black people. He said, let the Negroes, through a corresponding effort on their part, show by every means in their power the warmth of their response, their readiness to forget the past, and their ability to wipe out every trace of suspicion that may still linger in their hearts and minds. Now that is very clear, friends. And if the black people persist in nursing their wounds with the knowledge of Baha'u'llah in their hearts, they too will become a humbug to the onward march of the cause of Baha'u'llah in this world. The responsibility is therefore equally distributed. It's just that the approach might be different, and that there may be certain qualities to meet from each side. We cannot fail in this undertaking, friends. We must press on with the proclamation of this message, the extension of this faith, for the destiny of mankind depends upon it. We cannot have white Baha'is pretending that Baha'u'llah has not, in fact, spoken out against prejudice. We cannot have them coming to these islands and telling these people that they do not know how to learn to take over the administrative order. We cannot have them jockeying for power on the institutions of the faith in these islands. We must let these people find their identity in the purpose of Baha'u'llah. Correspondingly, the black people must not be so blind to the requirements of the faith that they exclude white people from the administrative order, from their thinking, from their love experience. We must share equally, openly, and together.
Friends, I need not guess at least how overwhelmed you all are. Having our responsibilities placed before us so clearly, so simply, and yet so effectively. The time is short, and we have a lot of work to do. You know your responsibilities. Please do it.